Hello guys, my name is Ron Baziaco, and today I'm going to give you a lesson on how to solve very basic algebraic equations. So this is given that you have a general knowledge of just what a variable is, and if you don't, a variable is a symbol we give to an unknown value. An example of this is if someone were to ask you, how much money do you have in your account, in your bank account, and you didn't know the exact number, you could say, well, I have X dollars in my bank account. And if someone were to put $10 more into your bank account, well, your new balance, which would be X, and then 10 more. And so today, we're going to be solving certain equations that involve variables, one step, two step, and maybe one or two, three steps. But before I dive into that, I think it's important to review a couple things. First, I'm going to talk about opposites, especially with operators. So, as most of you have probably already discovered, addition and subtraction are opposite from each other. Let's say you take any number, you can choose any number, I'll go with 39. If you add anything to that number and subtract the same amount, it's always going to give you this value. So let's say if I were to have 39 and I added 720 and subtracted 720, this is going to give me right back to 39, because since these two are opposites, the addition and subtraction, this is going to cancel out with this to give me a 0. And there's also another opposite that you may or may not have already realized is an opposite. The multiplication and division. Now this is different than addition and subtraction. And addition and subtraction, they're going to equal out to 0. But if you multiply a number by anything and then divide, it's still going to give you the same result, but instead of them canceling out to 0, they cancel out to times 1 or divide 1. It's the same thing. Because if you assume that it cancels out to times 0 or divide by 0, now it's going to give some big problems. So let's say I choose my number 39 again, and I multiply this by 5,952, and then I'm dividing by 5,952. Well, these two can give me 1, which is just going to give me 39 times 1, which is just going to give me 39. One more opposite that I want to talk about is any number to an exponent and the root of that number. Specifically, we'll be looking at any number squared compared to the square root of any number. And these two are going to be opposites as well. So if I have any number, let's say 39, and I choose to square it, and then find the square root, well, since these two are opposites, they're going to cancel each other out, and it's going to leave me with 39. Now it's important to note, depending on your teacher, they may say that the square root of a certain number can give two solutions, right? The square root as defined, let's say if we have square root of 16, it's asking for two numbers that can multiply to give us 16, which if we go 4 times 4, it's going to give you 16. But you can also go -4, and if we multiply that by -4, if you put that in your calculator, two negatives make a positive, that also gives you positive 16. So depending on what your teacher's rule of thumb is, you may have two different answers. So now we're going to take these opposites and we're going to apply them to equations. So one other thing we should touch base on is this equal sign. What the equal sign is saying, like in the name, is that the two sides are equal. But what it's also saying is that you cannot do something to one side without doing it to the other. Let's say on one side I have 7 plus 1, and the other side I give 4 plus 4. Now let's say for some reason I wanted to remove this 1. So I can just subtract 1 from this side, right? With opposites, these two are going to give me 0, and I'm going to be left with 7. But for this to still be equal, I must do the same to this side. And this is going to give me 7. So it's very important to note that this equal sign can also be thought of as a scale. You know, like I have 8 pounds on this side, 8 pounds on the other side. If this is 8 and this is 8, if I were to take this 1 pound away from this side of the scale, for the scale to still be equal, I have to take one side away from this 4 plus 4. Now let's look at some equations. Let's start with the basic one. So consider this equation. And we want to solve for x. With most equations given, you're going to want to solve for the variable. So if the question just says solve, assume that you're solving for the variable. Now using what I talked about up there, to get this x just by itself, we can just apply the same principle of doing one thing on one side and replicating it on the other. So 5x plus 3, what's the opposite of a plus 3? Well, it's minus 3. But this minus 3 must be done on the other side. These two cancel out to give me 0, so I have x is equal to 13 minus 3, which is 10. Being able to balance both sides is key, and to think of it as a scale. If I'm removing 3 pound weight from one side of the scale, to keep the scale balanced, I must remove that 3 pound weight from the other side. However, there's a quicker way to do this, and it involves the opposites that I talked about. Say I have x plus 4 is equal to 6. Well, I can just take this and move it to the other side, and that would just put the x by itself and it's less steps. However, when you cross this line of equal, the sign or the opposite changes. And I have my opposites listed out here. So whenever something crosses the line, addition is going to turn into subtraction, and subtraction is going to turn into addition. Multiplication is going to turn into division, and division is going to turn into multiplication. Squaring is going to turn into a square root, and a square root is going to turn into squaring. So let's apply this. We move the 4 to the other side, but since it's crossing the line, this addition is going to become subtraction. And so what we're going to get is that x is equal to 6 minus 4, which is just 2. Let's try another one. Consider this. Consider the following. We have 3 times a number is going to give us 27. Now think. What is the opposite of multiplication? Well, we know it's division, right? So we're probably going to be doing something with dividing. It would be perfect if we could get this x by itself, because then we'll know what it is. So we want to take this 3 and move it over here. However, it's crossing this line. And as it crosses this line, it's going to change from multiplication to its opposite. And it's going to give us division. X is going to be 27 divided by 3, which gives you 9. So the biggest thing to remember when solving for these equations is that if we want to get this variable by itself, we can move things to the other side. But to move to the other side, you must flip it to its opposite. So that's the general basis of one-step equations. Now let's see what happens when we throw in another step. If I have 3x plus 2 is equal to 17, and I want to solve for x. Well, we have an x as being multiplied by the 3, and a 2 is being added to it. Now, whenever you solve equations, you generally follow the rules of BEDMAS. When moving stuff from one side to the other, we are actually going to do this in reverse. So we're going to start with addition or subtraction, then move on to division or multiplication, and then end with brackets and exponents. So, if we start with addition and subtraction, if we move this positive 2 over, it's going to flip into a subtract 2. Now, we have 3 times x is 15. We can move this 3 over, but it's going to become a divide. Which gives us that x is equal to 5. Let's try another two-step equation. X over 7 plus 5 is equal to 54. So what are we going to do first here? Well, we're going to go in reverse order of BEDMAS, and we're going to start with this plus 5. We can move it over. Once again, that plus turns into a negative. And so x over 7 is going to give us 54 minus 5, or x over 7 is going to equal 49. Now for our last step, we see that x is being divided by a 7, and it's going to give us 49. So we can move this divide by 7 over, but when we move this over, that has to turn to a multiplication because it's crossing this line. And so this gives us x is equal to 49 times 7, which if I do this right, I think it should be 343. Let's try one more. So generally in grade 9, you don't touch base on this much, but I think it'll be interesting. X squared is equal to 144. So we want to get x by itself. So we want to move this exponent guy over. However, since it's crossing the line, it's going to turn into its opposite. And that squared is going to turn into a square root. And we're going to get that x is equal to the square root of 144. And if you type that in your calculator, because obviously for most math classes you're allowed a calculator, x is going to give you 12, which is a solution. However, like I said earlier, depending on your teacher, this may not be enough, because if you look at the equation, x squared is equal to 144, if you were to type into your calculator, negative 12 times negative 12, this is also going to give you positive 144. And so generally, with square roots, if it has a positive inside the root, it's going to give you two solutions. It's either going to be the positive solution or the negative solution. That's more on grade 10. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video on solving one-step and two-step equations.